Hey you guys, this is Magduit, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this bass. Anyway, so the way that you make this bass is relatively straightforward, and I'm going to hopefully teach you all the ins and outs for the FL Studio gang members that are out there. So basically there's two things going on. There's a citrus patch, and then there's this kind of like distortion chain with a low pass filter built into it, and I'll show you guys how to make all of this. Not all these things are stock plugins, but everything is free. So if you guys want to follow along, feel free to check the description, and the download links to all of these pieces of software will be located there. So to start off, let me go ahead and create a new citrus. The first thing I usually do is I drag in a citrus and then I patcherize it. So let me go ahead and do that. In case you guys didn't know, that is a way to kind of quickly grab the instrument that you want and then put it into Patcher. Sometimes I won't think of wanting to put it into Patcher until I've already designed my instrument, so just knowing that that exists helps out a lot. And then let's go ahead and first start with like the basic sound. So I learned a lot of this stuff from a YouTuber slash music producer named Frequent. Shout out to Frequent. Definitely check out his link in the description as well. He has some really cool videos to help you go even deeper into sound design, but he uses Ableton and I use FL, and I'm hopefully just trying to spread the love and show people how to do this inside of FL Studio without a whole lot of plugins. Let's start off by creating the synthesizer that we're going to need. As I'm using Citrus because I want to use FM synthesis, and inside of Citrus there's a cool function that allows you to draw in your harmonics. So what I'm going to first do is make sure this is turned down to a reasonable level here. Okay. And obviously we're at a little bit too high of a pitch, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this down 12 semitones. I'm actually on the second octave, but you can go to any of these, but I just find that you got to go to the second octave and then down 12 to get that sub frequency. And once we are here, the first thing that I usually do is just declick all these. You don't need to, but I find that it makes it a little bit cleaner and smoother. You can also just leave it and explore and experiment. But yeah, this little declick button, I'm just going through these first three operators. I'm only going to be using these three today, but I'm sure you could use more if you feel comfortable using them. So the first thing is with the sine wave. I usually just leave that as is. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second operator. As you saw, I turned down the output a little bit because by default it's kind of loud. So I usually just turn it down until I get it to sit kind of nicely, because we don't want it too loud because we're going to be distorting it and all that kind of fun stuff later. So on the second operator here, I'm going to go to the oscillator section, and in the oscillator section, these little kind of bars here are dictating the individual harmonics. So if I was to click and drag, I can draw in, you know, whatever I want harmonically. And that's kind of how we're going to be sculpting our instrument. So let's go ahead and just randomly kind of draw some stuff in here. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the first step to our sound. After that, I'm going to go to the third operator over here, and I'm going to draw in some more random stuff. Truly random. In fact, let's be a little bit less crazy. Maybe we'll kind of try and do something like that. Drag that one up. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to FM this third one to itself by, as you can see here, this is where you can FM into different stuff. And this third one here, if I click and drag this knob, it will FM it to itself. Kind of give it a little bit more sizzle. I guess in theory you could also add noise, but I think that this kind of sizzle is a little bit more timbrally complex and also not as random. Anyway, so that's kind of the patch. That's the sound that we're going to be trying to get right there. So after you've created your citrus patch inside of Patcher, and you don't have to do all this in Patcher. You can, in theory, do this on the slots over here, but I like to use Patcher because it kind of gives you an infinite number of possibilities. You can always add and remove stuff, and you're not limited to just 10 slots of things. So the next step is going to be to actually add another patcher. This is not something you have to do either. You could just continue in this patcher, but I'm going to use a brand new patcher because I want to show you all how you can make your own FX sections as well. So this is going to be technically an FX patcher preset, and then this would be the instrument itself. So the first step, in fact, here I will just bring up the chain that I was using earlier. So the first step is going to be to add the kilohertz plugins to your computer. The free essentials bundle will have all the ones that I'm going to be using today, but we're going to be mainly just using the filter. In theory, you could use any filter, including you can use EQ2 if you want, or if you have any other filters that cost money, like my personal favorite, Riff Filter Lite, you can use that as well. But basically, all we're going to be creating with these filters is a low pass. We just want one low pass with a pretty high Q value. So as you can see with the Q value going up, it creates this little resonant peak. And we're going to be using this as our tool to kind of sweep through the distortion and other effects to kind of create these timbrally interesting sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. I'm going to actually just move all these over because we're not really going to use them. I just wanted to bring up the chain so that way I could not only reference it but also show you all the plugins. So yeah, we're going to use the kilohertz filter here. Going to run our audio into the input, and I'm going to also just deactivate that MIDI by right clicking on it, and I'm going to also just wiggle this knob, which is the cutoff filter, and I'm going to right click, go to inputs, parameters, and then last tweaked up here. It's going to pull up that little red dot on the left here, and that's going to let us create a knob to attach to it. But for now, we're going to ignore that. We're just going to maybe scoot this up a little bit here, maybe not too much, and then we'll continue the chain. So the next thing that I usually put after a filter is a frequency shifter. Now, before I watched Frequent's video, I had never really thought about putting a frequency shifter like this on a bass, because the way that he had it, and I will reset this to default here, is he had the frequency slightly adjusted, but then he had the dry mix not fully wet. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because this is definitely going to impart some phasing, but for some reason it just sounds nice. And yeah, I'll show you what I mean, but for now, let's go ahead and let me show you as we go, by the way, what this sounds like and how it continues to evolve. So without the frequency shifter, I mean, it sounds pretty cool already, but that's just with the filter. So we're going to go ahead and add that frequency shifter here. Let me go to my frequency shifter. Let's add that in here. And by default, it's set to 200, but we're going to want to turn that down to a pretty slow rate. And then we're also going to hit that dry mix. And you're going to see it's going to create phasing. But there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. And because this knob is so amazing, we're going to go ahead and also do the same thing that we did before. Just wiggle it a little bit, right click, inputs, parameters, last tweaked, so that we can get both of these. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add a convolution reverb, and we're going to use Fruity Convolver because it comes with FL Studio, and we want a reverb that is really, really short. We don't want a long reverb here. We want it to be as short as we possibly can get it. So what I went to in the presets here was small rooms, and then I think I used the bathroom, or was it, let's see here, was it bedroom maybe? Let me go to bedroom. Yeah, bedroom. Okay. So I used the bedroom, and then I even hit this stretch knob and put it down to 50%. So that way it is basically as small as possible. And you can hear the width that it's adding, but we want it to be maybe at about 50% wet, something like that. You don't actually want to hear it before you put the distortion on, but you want it to be there. So right now, we got some movement, we got a filter cutoff, all kinds of fun stuff. But the next thing after this is we're going to want to put on some distortion. So after the convolution reverb, we're going to go ahead and load up our kilohertz distortion. You can use any distortion module you want, but I'm just using the kilohertz distortion in this case. You can also use something like M Saturator, which is also free. In fact, you know what? For this one, I will use M Saturator, and I will include this in the description as well. So let's go ahead and just load up M Saturator. Let's deactivate that MIDI because we don't need that. So let's make sure we can hear it. Okay, now we've got a nice spicy bit of distortion, but it's not clipping, and we're just gonna cool. So we got some distortion. The next thing after the distortion that I add is some kind of multiband compression. Now in this case I'm going to use OTT because it has a very distinct sound and it's free. But if you do have other forms of multiband compression, Fuse compressor, is a really good plugin that I would definitely recommend getting because it allows you to have a little bit more control, and Frequent uses it in one of his videos to describe this process as well. But in theory, you could also use things like ProMB. You can use all kinds of other multiband compression if you so choose. Even Fruity Multiband would work. But I recommend OTT just because it's easiest to use at first and it will help get you into the sound that I specifically showed you. So by default, it pops up looking like this, and we're going to quickly run it through here. And it sounds pretty cool, but we're going to want to do a couple things. First thing we're going to want to do is change the upward and downward compression to 200%, just so it really squashes it. And then we're going to want to adjust the time till we get the reverb to sound the way that we want it. So right now, the reverb we can't really tell is there still. But if we go back into this OTT and adjust the time, you'll be able to see how it affects the reverb. So you see with it all the way down, we can really feel that tail. And with it up further, we can't feel much of it. Now we want to kind of feel the tail, but not very much of it, so that sounds pretty cool. And you can even adjust the depth as well, so that way you get a little bit more of the raw. So let's go ahead and do 80% here. We're gonna also just deactivate this MIDI here. And then the last step of the chain here is a clipper. Now, there's all kinds of free clippers. Some people use G-Clip. I've had issues with G-Clip personally, but there's no problem with it if you can get it to work properly. It would just crash my DAW for some reason. But I'm going to use this plugin called FreeClip, and FreeClip is a free clipper that I have been using for a while. And it does seem to do the trick, and it's got a lot of very nice settings that I enjoy. And yeah, by default, it pops up looking like this. We're going to turn down the oversampling because we don't need it right now. We'll be able to turn that up at some point if we really want to, but right now, in fact, with the original one that I just did, I didn't have it up at all. So we're going to put the ceiling up all the way to 0 dB, and then we're going to pretty much just clip the ever-living shit out of this sound. Now, by default, my clipper was set to plus 12 dB, so let's go ahead and just see. Let's make sure we turn off our clipper on the master fader, just so we can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so not enough clipper, so we could either do one of two things. We could just keep boosting it. And sometimes you won't be able to boost it until you get the sound that you want, but what I actually will do as well is I'll just add another one at the same level or a little bit less. So let's go ahead and put on a second clipper here, just to get a little bit of that sizzle. And now if we go back to our cutoff, so we're really making those loud, clicky, almost distorted basses at this point. And that's the whole chain. That's pretty much all you got to do. And now that we've got all that set up, let's go ahead and delete these. So that's kind of the chain. So we got our filter, our frequency shifter, our fruity convolver, our M compressor, then an OTT. and then a clipper, and then another clipper just to make sure we're really fucking clipping it as hard as we possibly can. And I'm just going to deactivate these MIDIs. So once you have all that set up, then you can go back over to this if you so choose, or this. But I'm going to actually show you twice just to make sure that you really understand what's happening here. So I'm going to create two knobs, one for the filter cutoff and one for the frequency amount in the frequency shifter. So let's go ahead and create two knobs. Now I have a knob preset. You can use any of these presets. I'm just going to use my preferred preset here. I'm just going to make two of them. So I'm going to rename this one to low pass. And then I'm going to make one more, and I'm going to call this one frequency. Let's do FQ for short. So this is the frequency of the frequency shifter. This is the low pass filter amount. And we're going to go back to our map, and we're going to actually just quickly click and drag from this little surface area up into the things that we enabled earlier, the little red dots that we enabled by clicking right click input parameters last week. And what that's going to allow us to do is affect those two parameters from not having to open up the menu of the whatchamacallit, the plugin. Also, I'm just going to go ahead and set this default value to 50%. So what I can do is I can go in here, I can right click and copy this value here. And then I can go over to this, right click, paste the value. And then if I click on this little wrench again, right click and set default value, now our default value will be right in the center. So now if we have this, okay, cool. So we've got that going. Turn it down a little bit. Now, once again, this is going to depend on how you like to mix. I usually will only need one clipper in here because I'll have a clipper on the master fader. You can also use the clipper that's built into things like Minimal Audio's Rift if you have Rift for the distortion, or if you have anything else with a built-in clipper. Minimal Audio's plugins have a built-in clipper in all their software, so it's pretty helpful. But if you don't have that, like I said, you can just use this free clipper and it sounds great. So yeah, now that we've got those two knobs set up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to activate these because I'm going to actually kind of just copy these knobs over to this surface. So I'm going to just click on surface over here. I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to just duplicate these over to here. Just because, once again, I'm doing it twice just to really show you how to set this all up. So in this case scenario, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually enable the two parameters from in my patcher from here inside of this patcher, because this is the instrument patcher, and this is going to be the final kind of thing that I want to be able to access. So we're just going to go over to here and we go surface LP and inputs, parameters, surface FQ. Now, in theory, you could have just gone over here and clicked on these two parameters, but I really wanted to make sure you understood how to make these knobs and why they're useful. So now let's go back over to here. We got the LP and FQ. We're going to just link those to their respective red dots. And if you're ever curious as to which red dot means what, you can look in the top left corner up here, and you could see FQ when I hover over it. And even this one, it says knob 2. So that's going to be a little bit more difficult to understand, but I think it's because I didn't rename it once. Yeah, see, so once you rename it once, then it will save the name over here as well. So yeah, in case you are curious. So you just click and drag those over to here. And now that we've got our knobs set up, that's pretty much everything when it comes to the instrument itself. Now the last step to this whole equation is setting up a way to record all these sounds. Now my personal favorite way is with Edison, because when you're using Edison, you can kind of just set it in the background and forget it. And that's the best thing, is you'll just capture everything that you're working on, and usually you'll have a lot of really good results. Plus, you could set up the mode here. So there's these two drop down menus. So I'm going to record forever in the second drop down menu. But in this first drop down menu, you can actually decide how it's going to record. And I will usually put it to input mode. So that way, whenever I am recording, it will essentially only record when it detects a sound, and then it'll stop recording. So that way, whatever you do record is all going to be very close together and easy to manipulate. So let's go ahead and play this in. Let's go ahead and drop that clipper volume ever so slightly. Let's put it down to like 4-ish, maybe is probably good. There we go. Just a little bit less harsh on the clipper there. It's hard to tell because, once again, on my DAW, I mean, I usually put a clipper on the master fader, so I would really only need one of these. And the reason why that's kind of helpful is because then I'm recording the sound. I'm recording the sound in a way that it's okay that it's clipping. And I won't even really be able to I guess hear the clip in the actual recording, but then when I click and drag it into my project, it'll be clipping by default, and then I'll just have to turn down the volume. But anyway, let's go ahead and all I'm doing is just playing an F note, and I'm just clicking and dragging these knobs as I'm recording them. And as you can see over here, it's recording all the stuff. You can also go back into the patcher preset, and you can even make the key value a little bit sharper if you want something that's a little bit more resonant. Okay, cool. So we've got some sounds there. And yeah, usually what I will do after I've recorded a Mudpie session like this is I will save it. So let me just go ahead and do that. I'll just go to my bass samples here, and I guess technically this is something new. So I'll just make a new folder here, and I'll just call it like stock and free bass Mudpies. And we'll just call this something helpful. So I'll put my name just because you made it. If you're making it, obviously put your own name. It's important. And then, yeah, we'll just do Mudpie. And this is an F note. And then we'll just do, this is the first one. So just put a 0 at the beginning. You never know. At least that way I can have up to like 99 before I have to think about adding more numbers. All right. So now that we've got that saved, you can also just click and drag into the project. So we're just going to click and drag from here, this little arrow with the file. We're going to click and drag, and we're just going to drag it onto a track here. We're going to make it an audio track. And now we've got our Mudpie. And I'm going to actually just full screen this so you can really see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to turn this down as well. So let me show you what I mean by having the clipper on the master fader. So let me turn the clipper on my master fader. And once again, it's just a pretty heavy clip. But that way we can really see what this is doing. And I have this turned down quite a bit, but you'll see how this works. Let's go ahead and turn it down a little bit. Now, the last thing that I will usually do if I'm dragging this in and it's too harsh is I'll throw one last OTT on it, and I'll squash the downward And I'll usually do a little bit of multiband affecting here. So like usually you don't want a lot of mids in your bass. You might want to also take out some of the highs. Okay, and I've got it on full depth here, but once again, if you have something like Pro MB or even Fuse Compressor, you may want to use that instead. You could also just use Fruity Limiter. That also can get the job done depending on what you're trying to do. Like for example, if I was to use Fruity Limiter, in fact, maybe I will try and use that here, I would just set the ceiling a lot lower. Okay, so now what you can do, and I've got some other stuff going on just to show you the context here, but then what you could do is go ahead and start chopping up your Mudpie, and this is how you would use it contextually in a song, and now you'll be able to see the context of what it is doing. And then you can just go in here and chop it up. Add some little fades to all these, just at the ends and the beginning. And then you can combine the two together and then you get something that's similar to this. Anyway, and that's how you do it. That's how you make the basses. That's how you make the patcher preset. That's how you contextually use it. And it also includes the general sound designing techniques as well as the specific things you can use to get those sounds. And a lot of what I've been learning when it comes to these basses is it's really about kind of bringing in and taking away frequencies with a filter like a low pass filter or a high pass filter. And then distorting it and using that distortion with a little bit of things like reverb or a frequency shifter or something like that to create movement, as well as space for the instrument itself. And yeah, once again, shout out to Frequent because he really set me on this path. And obviously this is just the beginning. But yeah, I'm excited to share it with you all, and hopefully you guys learned something. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and keep making music. Peace.